All right, let's jump right into this explainer. Today we are unpacking a seriously fascinating piece of financial engineering, one that is literally reshaping how vulnerable nations fund their own survival. We're talking about debt for climate swaps. Now, if you've been following global climate finance for a while, you already know that capital is often constrained, but not necessarily because there's a lack of money globally. It's usually constrained by distribution issues, risk, and sovereign balance sheet limitations. So we're going to break down exactly how these swaps work, why they're gaining such incredible traction, and crucially, what their real-world limitations actually are.
It's a massive, deeply complex global problem. I mean, just think about it. The countries most vulnerable to the physical impacts of climate change are so frequently the very same ones carrying the absolute heaviest sovereign debt loads. When disaster strikes, or when proactive resilience is urgently needed, their fiscal space is just completely paralyzed. So, throughout this explainer, we're going to see how some incredibly clever financial mechanics are providing a lifeline here, effectively hitting two massive birds with one stone.
So here is our roadmap for today. We'll be covering the dual debt climate crisis, the anatomy of a swap, sovereign debt sustainability, financing green and blue goals, governance and monitoring outcomes, and finally, the limits of financial engineering. Okay, let's start with Section 1, the dual debt climate crisis.
Right, so here is our baseline definition. A debt for climate swap is a financial arrangement where a sovereign nation's external debt is restructured, reduced, or refinanced. But here's the real kicker. In exchange, that country strictly commits to investing the resulting savings into climate or environmental objectives. The crucial point here is that this instrument directly links sovereign debt relief with urgently needed climate investment. It's not just forgiving debt, it's actively repurposing it. Think of it kind of like refinancing your mortgage to get a much lower rate, but on the explicit, legally binding condition that you use those monthly savings to install solar panels on your roof.
And looking at this timeline brilliantly illustrates how the concept has evolved. As you can see, this isn't exactly a brand new idea. Back in the 1980s, we saw debt for nature swaps. Those were designed to address sovereign debt distress while simultaneously closing conservation financing gaps, often in places like Latin America. But fast forward to the 2020s, and these modern swaps have expanded massively in scope. They now tackle broader climate mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. The tool has basically evolved to match the sheer scale of our modern emergency.
Which brings us right to the heart of the issue, the dual crisis. Many climate-vulnerable countries are highly indebted, which severely limits their ability to invest in climate resilience. It's a dangerous trap. You simply can't build seawalls or transition to green energy if every single spare dollar you have is being sent right out of the country to service high-interest external debt. The swap mechanism attempts to snap that trap wide open by redirecting that fiscal space back home.
Moving on to Section 2, Anatomy of a Swap.
To decode some of the financial jargon, let's look at exactly who does what in these multi-layered structures. It's a really complex dance. You've got the debtor sovereign, who gets debt relief by committing to climate goals. You have the creditors, which could be bilateral, commercial, or multilateral lenders who actually agree to discount or forgive the existing debt. Then you have the intermediaries, like NGOs or development banks. They're the ones who actually structure these complicated deals and provide credit enhancements. And finally, the investors, who swoop in and purchase the newly refinanced, lower-cost instruments. Every single one of these players has to align perfectly for a swap to work. The core math here is just fascinating. This simple three-step process visualizes how old, incredibly expensive debt is transformed. Step 1, you discount the expense of existing debt. Step 2, issue a brand new, lower-cost financial instrument to replace it. And step 3 is where the magic really happens. You take the delta, meaning the original debt cost minus the new restructured debt cost, and those exact savings are earmarked and redirected directly into a dedicated climate investment fund.
A perfect real-world application of this exact math is the Belize Blue Bond. This is an absolute landmark deal. In this transaction, Belize's sovereign debt was refinanced at a significantly lower cost, largely supported by credit enhancements. And the savings? Well, they weren't just tossed into the general government budget, no way. They were strictly and legally directed towards sweeping marine conservation commitments. It's a textbook example of literally transforming a balance sheet liability into a tangible environmental asset.
All right, Section 3, Sovereign Debt Sustainability.
Now, this is a massive debate going on in financial circles right now. A key tension is whether these swaps are actually large enough to impact a country's IMF Debt Sustainability Analysis, or DSA. Essentially, are these deals big enough to provide meaningful relief, or are they just cosmetic tweaks? If a country is drowning in billions of dollars of debt, and a swap only frees up a few million, Well, it might be great for a specific coral reef, but it totally fails to alleviate the true macroeconomic burden on the sovereign state. The scale absolutely has to matter.
And that brings us to this incredible expert insight. It frames these swaps not merely as environmental charity, but as hard-nosed sovereign financial engineering. They combine balance sheet restructuring, concessional finance, and environmental commitments all into one powerful instrument. It proves that the barrier to saving the planet isn't necessarily a lack of money globally, it's a lack of the right financial plumbing to get that money exactly where it needs to go without bankrupting the recipient in the process.
Let's look at Section 4, Financing Green and Blue Goals.
So what are we actually buying here? These savings are heavily anchored to real-world applications. We're seeing a massive push into blue finance, which focuses on marine conservation, as well as forest protection and critical adaptation infrastructure. What's absolutely vital to understand here is that these projects generate non-market benefits. They provide public goods that just don't easily generate traditional financial returns. And because of that, financing them relies heavily on concessional capital and blended structures to succeed. You can't just fund a massive mangrove restoration project with a standard high-yield corporate loan, right? It just doesn't work.
And that is exactly why small island developing states, or SIDS, are leading the charge here. Countries like Seychelles and Barbados are the primary pioneers utilizing these mechanisms. Why? Well, because they face the most urgent climate vulnerabilities, literally facing rising sea levels threatening their very existence, while simultaneously dealing with incredibly high debt constraints. So they're using these swaps specifically for marine conservation and physical resilience against devastating storms. Which takes us to Section 5, Governance and Monitoring Outcomes. Now, you can't just hand over a massive amount of debt relief and hope for the best. To prevent misallocation and maintain credibility, strict governance frameworks are absolutely critical. These deals require dedicated, earmarked funds, so the money isn't just mixed in with general revenues. They require independent oversight bodies, very often involving third-party NGOs. They need highly transparent reporting mechanisms and clear, trackable performance indicators. I mean, if a country promises to protect 30% of its ocean in exchange for debt relief, someone has to independently verify that they actually did it. Because honestly, the alternative is disastrous. Without these strict frameworks, the risk of misallocation absolutely skyrockets. And in the world of high finance, if a deal looks like greenwashing or if the funds disappear into a bureaucratic black hole, it causes immense reputational damage. That reputational risk directly leads to investor reluctance, which could completely freeze up future climate finance deals for other vulnerable nations. So the integrity of the swap is just as important as the swap itself.
Finally, let's wrap up with Section 6, Limits of Financial Engineering.
While they are incredibly innovative, these swaps face some pretty steep hurdles that prevent them from being easily mass-produced. Just take a look at these scalability challenges. First off, there is a limited amount of debt actually eligible or available for this kind of restructuring. Second, the negotiations are highly complex, often involving dozens of sovereign and private actors. And because they're so complex, they have incredibly high transaction costs. Plus, ultimately, they strictly depend on creditor participation. If the lenders don't want to take a haircut on the debt, well, the deal simply doesn't happen. So the reality is that these are powerful but highly niche, context-specific instruments. They are like bespoke financial suits, meticulously tailored for specific countries at specific times. Consequently, their total global volume remains relatively small when you compare it to the massive multi-trillion-dollar scale of overall global climate finance needs. They are a crucial piece of the puzzle for sure, but they are not a silver bullet.
Which leads us to the ultimate question. Can these powerful but niche financial tools ever be scaled, standardized, and streamlined enough to actually meet the massive global climate finance gap? I'll leave you with that provocative thought to chew on today, because unlocking that scalability, taking this from a bespoke boutique financial product to a global standard, might just be the key to saving our most vulnerable nations. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning how we finance the future.